That wouldn't be appropriate, would it, Jim? They were the last two people in the building. Jim and Pam were working late at night, working towards a deadline. There's always a deadline to be met in the high-pressured world of Milk Magazine Incorporated. Look, I know it's 2018 and nobody reads print anymore, but just go with me on this. Pam was always pushing Jim too hard, always correcting his work, bossing Jim around, which some might say was appropriate, seeing as Pam was Jim's superior in the world of Milk Magazine Incorporated. The big cheese of Milk Magazine Incorporated. She had him wrapped around his finger. Even though it should be her finger. She had him wrapped around her finger. It was fun to begin with. But now she grew bored with Jim's lack of backbone. It was all too easy. Where was the challenge? Jim was less than nothing. And yet, after the many weeks of pressure that he felt in the Milk Magazine press business, oh fuck, that's not the right place. Hang on, sorry. Comma. And yet, after the many weeks of pressure that he had felt in the Milk Magazine print business, Jim had a moment of madness. Later that night, when all the other employees had left the building, Jim stopped Pam at the elevator. Pam was intrigued. I want to pour my river of pasteurized cream into your pot, Jim said to Pam. He forced himself to say these words. It sounded more bold and manly in his mind compared to what actually came out of his mouth. Despite the bravado of his words, ultimately, Jim was a sheepish boy. That wouldn't be appropriate, would it, Jim? Jim looked at the floor in embarrassment. What had he done? Pam smirked. The elevator door opened and she stepped inside. But she kept the door open. She kept the doors open. Pam's eyes were fixed firmly on Jim's eyes. He couldn't look away. He was caught under her hypnotic gaze. Pam's hand slowly glided up her body, from her tight stomach all the way to where the buttons were barely containing the voluptuous bosoms. With a flick of her fingers, buttons 1 to 3 were released. Biting her lower lip, the same hand slithered down her chest, her stomach, to her business trousers. Excuse me. To her business trousers. She unbuttoned her trousers and slightly unzipped her zipper. Jim could see her sky blue underwear. Frilly. Sky blue underwear. Jim's heart was racing. All he could hear was the pounding of his heart. All he can feel was the throbbing of his cock. All he can see was Pam's hand, where she was putting it. Her hand slipped right into her underwear, in clear sight for anyone, for any person to see. In clear sight for Jim to see. She moved her hand lower and lower until she was right where she wanted the hand to be. Her finger found her way to the sweet spot, the clit, the labia, the G-spot! I might need to change that a little bit, make it a little bit less forceful. Never taking her eyes off Jim, Pam began to rub, to stroke, to insert. Moving faster and faster, panting and slightly squirming at the sparkling of sexual energy that she's inflicting upon herself, never taking her eyes off Jim. Jim couldn't believe his eyes. This is the kind of thing he saw in terrible porn videos on the internet. He was feeling rather silly for always jumping into the sex scenes in the porn videos. If only he had watched them from the beginning, he might have spotted the subtle clues about Pam's intentions sooner. That's a terrible sentence, and I might have to rewrite that. But no, we'll carry on. What started as an innocent bit of fun on Pam's end started to spiral out of control. She only wanted to tease Jim, but quickly found that she was unable to control herself. She was unable to What? That's not right. She was unable to stop herself. That's better. That makes more sense. She was unable to stop herself. She kept pushing and pressing her G-spot harder and harder. She was no longer thinking, merely reacting. Pam grasped onto her unbuttoned shirt and yanked with all her might. Tearing and exposing her breast to Jim. With her free hand, she squeezed hard at her tit. Might need to rewrite that bit. She then lifted her breast to her mouth as she reached down with her tongue to try and lick the areola. Jim was frozen on the spot, unable to move, unable to comprehend the sexy sex goddess that he saw before him. "Well," Pam growled at Jim, "don't just stand there." Jim just snapped out of his trance and, like a good boy, ran into the elevator to take advantage of the situation. No longer thinking, his primal instincts kicking in, he began kissing Pam hard, his tongue penetrating her longing mouth. The sounds and the moans that they were making were getting louder and louder, hands fumbling all over each other's bodies. When all of a sudden, a short jingle could be heard. Wait, Jam commanded. Jam? Wait. Pam commanded as she turned to her wrist to look at the notification that had just popped up on her Apple Watch 3. There was a moment of pause within the moment of lust. "What is it, Pam?" Jim said in his abrupt moment of clarity. "We've just had another 25 subscribers to Milk Magazine." Well? Jim replied, unsure of what to say. He didn't want to spoil the moment after all. With a cheeky smirk, Pam reached out to the elevator buttons using her feet. Just right foot, because she needs one foot on the ground. With a cheeky smile, with a cheeky smirk, Pam reached out to the elevator button using her foot and closed the door. Isn't it interesting how things present themselves sometimes? The end.